Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensies. I'm your host, Parker Settecase. I've got a couple master's degrees in theology, and I'm working on another in philosophy of religion. And in all of this time studying, I've had some really awesome conversations with brilliant people. But unfortunately, I have not recorded them. So they're just up here or they're just lost in the sands of time. So the goal of this podcast then is to continue having these awesome conversations, but to record them and share them with you so that you get to learn as I learn. So, we're going to be talking with experts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so you're invited to come think with me. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about relations, real relations. We're going to be getting into metaphysics and how to think about God's relation to the world. I'm really excited. We have with us once more Jordan Stefaniak, the one of the co-hosts of the London Lyceum, and I forgot all his titles. He's got a bunch of cool ones over there, but just really good work. He's a classical theist himself, but in like a weird way, man, he's going to be arguing against a form of classical theism or a critique of other models of God. So let me just not speak for him. But before we jump in, I want to thank everyone at Patreon, all you guys who are making the dream possible, making it come true. This is awesome. If you like this podcast, if this podcast is your favorite or one of your top five, please consider supporting the podcast. Please consider clicking the link in the description to my Patreon account, and you can join for all different levels of support. And with those levels, you get different goodies, including early access to episodes. So please do that. Please check that out. You can leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That would be really helpful. And a comment, and you can like and subscribe to this YouTube video. Leave some comments here. Maybe Jordan will come back. I know he's a little afraid of the wild world of YouTube, as am I. But if you join our Facebook group, Parker's Pensies Penseurs, you can also ask your questions of our guests, many of whom are in that group. So without further ado, let's pull Jordan in. Dude, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here, though. You mentioned brilliant people and experts, and I am neither of those things, but I am a part of the Facebook group. So
Let's
if
go.
I say something really dumb or maybe hopefully interesting, you can message me there.
That's right. That's awesome. Well, dude, this has been it's been a fun journey, like getting to know you and stuff. As many of my listeners will know, man, it's hard for me to take a side on classical and neoclassical theism because I got guys like you. I think you're brilliant, man. I think you do really good research, even if you don't think you're brilliant. And so I read your stuff, and I'm like, this is a really good case. And then Mullins comes on, and Mullins makes really good cases. So I'm not trying to be wishy-washy. I'm just still trying to figure this out. But I appreciate your work because I think you're really honest and you point out flaws and you say, hey, here's some bullets I got to bite. But then you also argue against other classical theists who take shortcuts, maybe, or I don't know how to describe it without being mean. But I appreciate your work, man. So thanks again for what you're doing.
I appreciate it. I mean, that's one thing I've really tried to focus in on is being transparent and honest, um, and pursuing truth more than pursuing tribal politics.
Yeah.
So I think I'm in the evangelical context. It's pretty easy to want to be a part of the good old boys club or whatever it is,
right.
And it's temptation is very strong to do those sorts of things. But I don't find them useful, valuable, or really helpful to the pursuit of truth. So I just try to avoid that kind of stuff and try to just shoot straight, be honest. And hopefully that's more persuasive than the alternative.
Yeah. Hey, man, so if someone hasn't listened to the London Lyceum, or it's hard to believe if they're listening to this and they're not listening to yours, but and they didn't listen to our past podcast, like, can you give us a little background on what you're studying now, and then maybe your other degrees? What you said
Yeah.
you're not an expert, man, but now you got to boast yourself up a little bit. Like, what qualifies you to talk about this?
Sure. So I'm not an expert, but I'm not a total dunce. So I've got a bachelor's degree in. I mean, it was the title of it's pastoral leadership and biblical exposition with a minor in Greek New Testament. So that basically meant you take a bunch of exegesis courses on the Bible and you do a bunch of Greek stuff. So
Mhm.
I've done a ton of both of those, which was a great foundation for me. I'm a Christian, so I believe Scripture is supremely important.
Mhm.
And so that I think is a great foundation for thinking theologically and philosophically about stuff. From there, Did an MDiv at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary,
Yeah.
emphasis on the, kind of like the Ohio State.
Right, dude. Thanks.
A little pretentious about it, but that's fine. So I did that there. I took the degree that basically lets you do whatever you wanted with your electives. So I was able to kind of mold it how I wanted. So I did a bunch of church history and a bunch of theology courses. So I had a great experience there. Then I did a THM at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, which was a fabulous experience. So I only did PhD seminars there, which was also really neat and cool. So I had the pleasure of working with Jamie Dew and Greg Welty a bunch. Greg was my THM supervisor. Just awesome. He's just so cool, so smart.
Yeah.
He studied under Richard Swinsburne, so he was really helpful. And I did my thesis in defense of classical theism. So that was really kind of the impetus for a lot of these sort of things. And then from there, I'm in, I guess it's year 3 of my PhD program in philosophy at the University of Birmingham in the UK. I don't live in the UK. And I guess for the last 2 years, I've almost not been allowed in the UK because of COVID, but I go over there as often as I can, which has been once since COVID happened. But hopefully I plan to be back there again this next year, and Lord willing. But it's been a great experience there. So I study philosophy of mind, philosophy of religion, research those areas, but a lot of that intersects with classical theism because I'm doing a lot of work in conciliar Christology. So a lot of fun. Oh, and I guess I did do further postgraduate doctoral research at the University of Louisville on Aristotle, which was extremely helpful. That was
helpful for coming up with a podcast name, right?
Oh, that's right. So the London Lyceum refers to Aristotle's, of course, academy. London refers to the Second London Confession of Faith, which, if you're not familiar, is a old Baptist confession of faith that's really robust and big. And of course, 2 L's sounds really cool.
That's right.
So the podcast was born, which we talk about everything from analytic theology and philosophy to Baptist history guys and to traditional Reformed confessional sort of theology. So it's a fun mix.
Yeah,
I have a great time talking with people. It's unique, niche area, but I enjoy it.
So good. And you're with your Dr. Father is Eugen Nagasawa, right?
So I have co-supervisors there. I don't know if that's the case everywhere, but I have Eugen and Nick Effingham.
Oh, dude, I didn't know Effingham was your other guy. That's awesome.
Oh man, yeah, Nick is awesome. He is. He is just he is a great philosopher, and he likes doing a lot of philosophy of religion stuff. So I don't know if people realize that. He's published quite a bit. He's got a new article in, I think, Religious Studies on some model of like pantheism or panentheism that's compatible with classical theism. I skim read it, didn't read the whole thing. I think it's fascinating. But I will send him a 5,000 word piece. Hey, give me comments on this, and I will get back 6,000 words in comments. So just, Incredible. Judicious, awesome in every way, and makes me a much better thinker and writer.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, I've been meaning to ask him to come on, so I might play on your name here. So that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Well, dude, let's get into some relations then. I want to jump in on your education stuff because I did a lot of the same stuff, which is super fun. But and I left my degree thinking like, dude, I got to figure out classical versus neoclassical theism type stuff, and had a lot of you guys on to try and help convince me. And I don't know, it depends on the day. So I might become a classical theist after this, but I want to talk about relations because they're so metaphysically interesting. It is super fun, but it's also interesting for our theology as well. So, man, real quick, can you just motivate it for us theologically? Like, why should a theologian care about relations or the philosophy of relations?
Sure. I think just from an abstract standpoint, you probably think, well, what's the use? But I think if you read anything in the doctrine of God, you will quickly realize that they are crucial to almost every important distinction that's been made in the Christian tradition when it comes to God's relationship to creation, God's, what existence as Trinity. All of these things fall down on relations. What are relations? So you've got the traditional, I guess, terminology on God as Trinity, where he's got these distinct, peculiar personal relations.
Right.
And then, of course, the relationship to creation. There's the famous classical way of going about saying that God has no real relation to the creation. He's only merely logically related to creation. And we can cash out all the ways that those are used. But I think, I mean, if you just do a cursory read in the Doctrine of God, you're going to find it incredibly important. Of course, it's important for other areas too. I'm not an expert in a lot of those other areas, but it's relevant for those too. So if you're listening and you're not into the Doctrine of God, I know it's super relevant for that or too. I just don't know as much about it and how it applies to those situations. And I'm sure maybe if you listen to this and you see the taxonomies and the ways they're being used, you're like, oh yeah, it applies here. So I'll let you be the smart person to apply it in those ways.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, let's go over some taxonomies. You sent me over some stuff, and I pulled some stuff from it, which I thought was really fun. You give your own taxonomy, but maybe before that, we could look at Steve Dooby's taxonomy of relations. He's got, I think, 5 of them, right?
Yep. So Dooby, I mean, he's a sharp guy. I think if you read his stuff, you quickly realize, man, this guy knows a lot because he quotes Latin every
Yeah, that's
word.
right.
And I don't know Latin, so he must be real smart, which he is. He does careful work. So what I've tried to do in reading his stuff, and a lot of classical thinkers, they'll use different terms for relations, but they don't lay it out in a nice taxonomized way as a philosopher would like to see. So
why couldn't they all have been analytic philosophers back then?
You know, because there's some sort of weird agenda against us in the theological guild, and I'm trying to fight it.
Yeah, that's right.
So, fight the hegemony,
yeah,
or whatever the right word is for that. So let's think. Dooby, if you read his stuff, I think he's got 5. He kind of cashes it out 5 different ways. He's got a real relation, which would be now, I guess I need to preface this with, in a lot of theologians in different places, relation and distinction can be used interchangeably as terms. They can also be used differently. I think Dooby uses them the same way. If I'm wrong, I'm glad to be proven wrong, but I think I'm right. So he says a real relation would be a distinction between one thing and another thing that can be separated in reality. So, for example, 2 things that can exist without the other. So I would think of, I don't know, a distinction between me and you. What's a distinction? I mean, you have a greater, thicker, fuller, more powerful mustache than I do. That could be a real relation, because there's a real distinction that can be separated in reality. He also has a formal relation, which is a distinction between different formal aspects of one thing. So you can think of an animal and a man, or the intellect and the will. These are aspects of one thing. So if you take the traditional understanding of a human person, am a rational animal. That comes in 2 sort of aspects. It's like the animal and the rational man part. So you can formally separate them, though you can't like cut me in half and half of me is going to be an animal, half of me is going to be a man.
Right.
You also have a modal relation, which is a distinction between different modes of existing of one thing. This one's super confusing to me. So I'm sure there's some smart people out there who could give you great examples, but I think the obvious example, most people have put this in the Trinity. So the person, and this isn't modalism, this is just traditional.
Dude, it's always scary when
traditional Trinitarian doctrine to say that the persons are different modes, but not in the modalistic oneness Pentecostal sense, in a more scholastic modal relation sense, that there are different modes of existing as one thing. Then you have a rational or a logical relation, which is some sort of relation or distinction that's purely conceptual and ontologically reducible. So an example of this would be Thomas Aquinas gives in his classic text, he gives an example of a statue and an animal. So if a statue standing right here and the animal moves around it, they would say, yes, there is a relation that exists where the animal's to the left of the statue, then the animal's to the right of the statue. But that is a purely conceptual, ontologically reducible thing. It has no existence in reality. It's just all up here. So that ends up getting applied to God as well.
Jordan, we talked about this before. Sorry to jump in, but is this a Cambridge change? Is this the same?
So, Cambridge change is talking about changes.
Right. But so the animal moving to the left, if you're looking at him, he's going through a Cambridge change. His ontology, there's nothing actually changing except his location. So we want to say like there's no real change, a Cambridge change, and then it's the relation has changed in a logical sense, but not. Does that sound right? Do those match up?
Yes. So in that example, they would say the animal has a real change because it moved from left to the right. It's the statue that does not have a real change.
Oh,
It
okay,
is the one that has the Cambridge change,
gotcha.
where nothing intrinsic to itself is changing. It's all extrinsically
Hmm.
happening.
It's even in the same location. It's just other
Yep.
things relating to it cause a
So at
Cambridge
one
change.
point, the statue could say the animal's to the left of me, and at the
Right.
other point, it could say it's to my right. But nothing actually changed about that statue. It was
Yeah.
completely motionless and still and
Yeah.
immobile.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so that's a Cambridge change. Man, do you see that? Do you see the connection I'm seeing between that and like a
Oh yeah,
rational or logical relation?
yep, absolutely. So
Okay.
I definitely those hook up in significant ways. So
Great.
if you want to say that that was a Cambridge change, you would end up saying whatever it is that relation that was like existed is a conceptual or ontologically reducible in some sense.
Okay. Cool. And this is one, as you said, Aquinas uses it, and then everyone
yeah.
who wants to hold the Aquinas at all, like, okay, that's relation. Would you? I mean, you yourself, do you? Is this a relation you go with when it comes to God and the world?
Well, I don't know if we'll get into this, but if we want to talk contemporary metaphysics of relations, I mean, I'm going to be more on a moderate realism or an
Mhm.
anti-realism. So I'm going to end up saying like pretty much every relation that exists, period, bar none, is of this sort.
Mhm. Okay.
So yeah, I would apply it to God because I mean, I would just say across the board, all relations are like that. They don't have any metaphysical definable content, heaviness, weight to them in any situation or circumstance. So yeah, it applies to God too.
I think I'm not sure if we talked about this on the podcast or off air, but like when we were talking about changes, when we were talking about a
Yeah,
woman
yeah.
giving birth,
Oh yeah, yeah.
she goes through a change. Is that so? Now bringing it to relations, is the mom's relation to the child, is that still anti-realist?
Well, yeah. On my preferred account of relations, and maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm right, I would say that that's not a real. Well, I would say it's a real relation, but I would define real relation differently
Right.
than the tradition has defined it. So I would say, yeah, of course, you have a relation, but there's no metaphysical stuff going on that you're like adding or removing relational properties that
Yeah.
cause intrinsic change to you.
Interesting.
Let's say that like it's just all. I mean, I don't know if you want to say it's like some sort of version of nominalism in some sense, but
Mhm.
it's kind of close to that.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like. That's really interesting.
When it comes to relations, not across the board. I'm not a nominalist all across the board. So if some haters are out there,
They're
the
there, dude.
classical, they exist. I know I walk a fine line because I'm a classical theist.
Mhm.
Obviously, I run with a lot of classical theists, but I also am much more willing to ask questions and to say controversial things and to
Cool.
say, look, hey, I'm interested. Tell me what you got. Give me your best
Right.
shot. You know,
Right.
hit me in the jaw. Like
Yeah.
what's going to happen? Like just and most people aren't as open to doing that
Yeah.
as I am.
Yeah, dude. No, I feel that. I feel like the same way. I wonder, shoot, I had it, but it's gone now. Relations. Oh yeah. So like, I wonder if like if hardcore Platonist, heavyweight Platonist maybe
Yeah.
would say like the relation itself has ontological being, and that's what they mean by real. But you're saying you'd be, yeah, definitely nominalist in that there
Yeah.
a relation isn't a thing you can go point to in the same way if you're a Platonist that the universal triangle is a thing.
Yep. So I don't like most things in Platonism. I know that puts me in the bad boys club or something like
Well, I'm
that
gonna
right
call
now.
Greg Welty, dude, and we're gonna come get you.
I am some sort of conceptual realist in
Okay,
some
all right,
way.
that's good.
So it's just I'm not a Platonist. So I think Platonism has a definable, serious content. And if you start like jerry rigging with stuff and changing it and everything, then you're not a Platonist anymore.
Yeah,
So I just like I'm pretty close to Aristotle. But I'm not a Platonist.
Okay. Okay.
I mean,
All
I
right.
like Plato. He's smart. He's good. He's fun to read. He's got some good things that I agree with. Overarching stuff I think is right on. I mean, the idea that there is, you know, there's a transcendent reality. Basic things like that. Big ideas. Yeah, go be Plato lovers. But
Mhm.
I mean, when we want to say I'm a Platonist, well, that carries a whole bunch of baggage. I'm not
Yeah.
a Platonist. I don't think that the realms of the forms is an actual existing place out there.
Do you think
Like,
it's in
yeah,
the mind of God, though?
well, sure, it's in the mind of
Okay.
God in some very different way.
Yeah.
But that's not Platonism anymore.
Yeah.
I
Are
don't
you?
think.
I. This is, dude, way off of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the conceptualist stuff, would you follow Welty and say that they like don't depend on God; they're just eternally existing, or would you follow like a modified activism that God created the triangle concept or something?
Yeah, it's all super interesting to me, and I
Yeah.
honestly don't.
Yeah.
You could probably ask me on different mornings, and I'd give you different answers.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't remember the hard line distinctions between what Tom Ward's done and what Greg's Welty's done. I would say I'm closer to Ward, if I remember
Okay.
correctly,
Okay.
the last time I thought about it, than I am Welty.
Hmm.
So if your listeners are familiar with those two models, I would probably be closer to Ward.
That's
Um,
great. Yeah, they definitely are ahead. Yeah, they'll know that.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah,
All right, man. So, yeah, that is interesting. Can't stay there. Let's go back to that. We got one more on Doobie
yeah.
before I rudely interrupted. So we just ended with rational or logical relations, and then the last one is virtual.
Yeah, the virtual relation that he cashes out as a distinction between different operations and effects of one thing's power. So that's a super archaic
Yeah.
way of talking about things. Most people, I would say, probably don't have a concept for a virtual relation. But if you
I'm so
read the
glad you said that because I straight up don't, and sometimes historical theologians will use this kind of stuff, and I'm like,
yeah.
bro, I'm gonna pretend that I get what you're saying because I don't want to look stupid, but I don't.
Look, I think it's important to understand the language and the concepts that
Definitely.
the tradition is used, but not all the language and the concepts are right.
Hmm.
Like you can keep the core central claims of the great tradition and update them with better metaphysics and terminology.
Right.
That's not a sin. That's not wrong. That's actually how the great tradition has worked.
Right.
That's why you don't have Aristotle prior to the medieval period for the most. I mean, you got the categories and stuff, but you don't have full fledged Christian Aristotelianism. It's updating with the modern cutting edge philosophy and science of the day. Now, I don't think that means you have to onboard every garbage modern take that's out there.
Right.
But there is stuff out there in modern philosophy that's useful, and we should take it on. I think who is it? That's Gray Sutanto's done some work on Herman Bavinck's like
Hmm.
theological and philosophical eclecticism, if I can say that word right. And the idea, like he's like he just pulls stuff from everywhere that's good. It's like plundering the Egyptians, is what Augustine would call it. And that's the approach that I take. I'm like, if
Yeah.
there's something good here that can help me update my language, make it clearer, and give me firmer stability and ground, then yeah, I'm gonna take that. I don't
Yeah.
feel like the random stuff that's like on the outer edge of the circle of the great tradition is the stuff I have to preserve.
Right.
It's Gavin Ortland, if your listeners are familiar with him, he talks about retrieval. Theological retrieval is not repristination. It's not like you don't have to go back and just say it exactly like they said, and to just represent and repackage them exactly. You're updating and you're working through it and you're wrestling with it. Crap, I said wrestling with something, so I
Can't
guess
say
an
wrestling.
inside joke. So Ryan Mullins has made fun of me for saying that apparently in podcasts. I'll talk about wrestling with stuff. So I take it back. If Ryan's listening to this,
Bro, what's
I
wrong with
didn't wrestle with
wrestling?
it.
Wrestling's the best.
But yeah, I guess you're a wrestler. So
That's right,
anyway,
man.
that's I don't know how far off the topic I got, but the point is, like there are these old stuff, these ways of talking about things that I think are useful to know.
Yeah.
But I don't think you have to say that all these distinctions are either right or real or helpful even.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. That's a good segue into your own taxonomy. You give us another five, and dude, I like them. So can you hit us with those?
Sure. So if anybody wants to read more about relations, I highly recommend there's a book with OUP called The Metaphysics of Relations. It is really it's an edited volume of a bunch of different papers from a conference. I don't know, it's probably been like 6-7 years ago now. But I think it's a tremendous resource because if you want to study the metaphysics of relations, you're going to realize there's no academic monograph on the topic, period.
Hmm.
You have to find articles and you have to read pieces in other people's metaphysics books, but you don't have any dedicated massive real estate to it. So this is the best we've got. And it's got some really, really nice pieces in there. I think of Jeff Brower's article in there. Sidney Penner, I could be totally saying his name wrong, so I apologize in advance. But I emailed with him on his piece. Great dude. Another place you could go, I guess, is Bob Pasnow's Giant Metaphysical Themes book, and there's like 200 pages dedicated to some of this stuff. But they, in both those places, provide various taxonomies, and so I've kind of taken from them and made my own way of talking about it. So in some ways it's the same, and I'm depending on guys like Jeff Brower and Bob Pasnow, but in some other ways I've tweaked it. So if you want the sources, that's where I would say to go. But I cash it out 5 ways. And the difference between this and Dewey's taxonomy and most scholastics are saying, here are 5 different types of relations, almost like a toolkit.
Yeah.
So like you're like a theologian, you're going over to your toolbox and you've got the virtual relation, which is your hammer. You've got the modal relation, which is your saw. That's not what I'm doing here. These are ways of thinking about relations across the board. So these are different ways to say all the relations are like this. All the relations are like this. So I end up having just, a sledgehammer for every nail and everything,
Yeah.
which I guess has its pros and cons, but you could probably do some work to hook them up some way. But that's a preface to say that's how I'm talking about them in distinction from like how Dewey and our other scholastics are talking about them. So first, I say you could be a radical realist about relations. So you'd say that relations are fundamental entities of reality. This would be something like a structural realism. I'm not an expert in structural realism, but when I read about structural realism, it sounds like wacky. So if that's enough of an objection for you that it's wacky, then don't go there. There's second. So this is almost like descending order of strength. Realism. So relations are sui generis. I am terrible at pronouncing things.
It's so hard, dude, because you'll read it 1,000 times, but then you have to say it out loud, and it's like I've never said this out loud before.
So relations are sui generis, irreducible types of beings. So I think Aquinas probably does this. Maybe you can ask some Aquinas scholar if that's true or not. It seems like when I read them, it sometimes does. What's basically saying relations are their own unique, completely unique type of set of being. So you've got all sorts of metaphysical machinery out there, but relations are different. They're their own special category, and it's a strong version of realism. And then there's this third one in the middle, which is moderate realism, which is, I think, where I like to land. I feel good here. Things are related independently of the mind. So things actually exist outside the mind, but the relations are reducible to the related things. So if you have A related to B with the relation R, A and B are 2 actual things, but the relation reduces to just A and B. So the truth makers for the relations end up being non-relational features of the world. So there's no actual relational entity that exists, whether in real life or out in the abstract world of the forms or anything like that.
Yeah, that one seems. I mean, it's moderate, right? But it sounds the most common sense. Just if you're just getting into relations talk, it's like, well, you have 2 billiard balls, A and B, and there's a relation between the 2. But if you took away the balls, there wouldn't be the hanging relation anymore because it depends on the 2 things.
Of course, there's all sorts of questions that end up getting posed. So there are questions in debates in the metaphysics of relations on are there like, is it just one sort of relation, or is there like directional relations?
Right.
So I like to, this is a great example in my opinion. Major League Baseball unjustly did not punish the cheating Houston Astros. So there's a relation, unjustly failing to punish.
Hmm.
From the Astros perspective, they don't have the relation of unjustly, not punishing the Astros. They don't have that. They're on the receiving end, a directional end of they were the recipients of that, whereas Major League Baseball were the actors and not doing it.
Yeah.
So there's debates of saying like, well, those are two different relations going on, not just one.
Hmm.
So it complicates the picture and everything.
Yeah.
I would say that's, you guys are thinking too hard about this.
Yeah.
It's really simple. There's just two objects, or three objects or four objects, however many, and it's all reduces down to those objects. And let's do that. That seems common sense, and I like common sense stuff.
Yeah, it does. I could see where like those folks would come from and say like, well, I don't know if it's standpoint epistemology or whatever, perspectivalism, but saying like, well, yeah, because you're thinking about it from God's eye view, from the view from nowhere. But if you look in from the Astros perspective, then yeah, and so I could definitely see it getting complicated really quick. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
100%. So now we're going to go even less real.
Mhm.
You have this moderate anti-realism, which would say relations are purely conceptual abstractions with no existence in reality at all. So this would be sort of like everything's a logical relation. So it's similar to the one to moderate realism, but it would instead of saying that there are actual things related independently of the mind, it's all dependent on the mind. It's all conceptually generated, which I mean, you could probably ask me on a Saturday morning, and I might say, yeah, let's try this out for a ride. But for the most part, I would say that that's a bridge too far. And then you've got the radical anti-realism, which would say there are no relations at all since things are not related independent of the mind. So I think somebody like William Vacuum would be in that bucket.
Okay.
But you'd have to ask Jeff Brower. He might be in the moderate anti-realist camp, depending on the day as well.
Yeah.
So for me, what you find out is people say contradictory stuff and think contradictory things sometimes just because they're humans and they make mistakes and they grow and they change their minds. So it's just depending on what you read, you might find them in one of the two.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like, or I think that moderate anti-realism, I think of Kant maybe, that like there, it could be a framework that we're projecting out on the world.
Yeah.
I'm wondering the radical realism, a distinction between radical realism and just realism. I think of radical realism being like maybe hylomorphism, that like structure is everything. So like relations, if insofar as they are making up structure, everything is just reducible to relations. Whereas it seems like realism's like, no, of course you got other stuff, but the relation is just as real as the things it's related.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have no idea. I'd have to ask Ross Inman.
Okay. Yeah. Dude, do it. Okay, so we got that. Now that's kind of like the philosophy of relations, but now we're bringing it into theology. And here we're going to be talking about a forthcoming paper by you and did Andrew Hollingsworth, is this a co-edited paper that you guys did?
Yeah, so we both wrote it. So I guess I wrote the first maybe two sections. So let me see here. I've got it open on my computer so I can just tell you. But I mean, we worked on this. This was a joint project. Awesome. So I did the first two sections. He did the third section. And then I think I did the the fourth section. So that means I wrote and he wrote those pieces, and then we edited and talked through it together to get to where it is. So it is a joint venture. It's both of us on it. However, I had the primary ownership of this portion, I think, that you're wanting to talk about.
Yeah. And what's this called? It's forthcoming in Philosophia Christi, right?
Yep, that's right. And what is the title? It's pretty lame. Craig Carter on Creatio Ex Nihilo and Classical Theism, Some Objections.
Yeah, awesome. So for the listeners who listen religiously, Dr. Carter's been on to talk about the very book that we're going to be talking about here, Contemplating God with a Great Tradition. And in there, he makes some claims that any, I don't want to misrepresent, but I'll misrepresent and you can correct me. In any model of God, which is not classical theistic model, will have a problem with or can't make sense of creation ex nihilo, because you have this problem of, if God's relating to the world, then there's no, I'll let you motivate that too. Does that sound right? Does that sound like Carter's claim?
So let's see here. Let me find Carter's claim and comment on it directly, because I think it's important to put the words in his own mouth. So,
Yeah.
because it is a rather radical claim in my mind. So while I'm looking for it, all right, because and one of the things that you got to know about this paper, like, well, I guess two things. I mean, I agree with, I think, Craig Carter on probably 95% of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, coming from a friend to a friend saying, look, like, I agree with you, but man, you missed the boat on this one. So, and I think that's what friends are supposed to do. I think that's what you're supposed to do with your own tribe, is to call each other out. And I think that's way more common in philosophical circles, where you can, you go to your friend's conference and you're like, dude, this paper is a train wreck. You've completely missed this objection. And then afterwards you're like, hey, let's go hang out and get drinks and, talk and watch football.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I was just going to mention the same thing that I've noticed living in two different worlds of philosophy and theology, like yourself, that is definitely true. Like, and I don't know why, if it's just an accident of history or whatever, but theologians take things a little bit more personally. And I don't mean that it's a character flaw or anything like that, but just the institution of theology, like in that circle, things get heated real fast. And maybe it's because there's such high stakes, right? And you're saying, well, we're talking about God, and if you misrepresent God, this is a really big deal. Whereas, like you said, in philosophical circles, it's actually an honor if someone takes up your work, because that means that it was worthwhile enough for them to read it and do all the hard work of thinking through it. But the compliment does not go the same way in theology.
Yeah, I don't know why.
For the most part, maybe analytic theology is different. They've inherited that from analytic philosophy, maybe, but I still think it's a little bit more personal when you're going at someone's theology.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, that's definitely part of it. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that I think go into it, because I mean, it's just like, if you disagree with my philosophical position on, some minute, super narrow, complicated topic, like, who cares? If you disagree with like who I worship as God, well, that's pretty much fundamental to my life.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah. Okay. Were you able to find that?
Yeah, I did. So it's, well, I can't tell you what page number it's going to be, but
yeah,
Carter says this, and I quote him here. He says, quote, all forms of relational theism, from process theology to dynamic panentheism to open theism to theistic personalism to ecofeminism. So that's everything that's not classical theism in his mind. He says this, all deny creation ex nihilo, end quote. That's his claim. They all deny it. On its face, that's false, because there are theistic personalists, there are open theists, there are others who explicitly affirm it. So from a perspective, we're like, hey, that's a bad argument, dude. Why did you make that argument? So part of our papers are showing, here's a neoclassical theist who clearly affirms it in William Lane Craig, and then here's an open theist in Richard Swinburne who clearly affirms it, and they do so consistently. So on its face, that claim is false.
So what would have to be true is Carter. If Carter said they all must, or their positions would force them to, and they're inconsistent in affirming this, that's different, because that's a weaker claim. But I think a more accurate claim. Or if he said they deny creation ex nihilo subscript or a alpha or something, which is the true one, but they all affirm beta, and beta is a false one. That would make more sense too, right? But just to make a blanket statement, which can be refuted by just pulling a quote from a neoclassical theist.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the big issues with theology today in general, I think, is just a lack of making good arguments. And so that's why they need philosophers' help to say, dude, that's not how an argument works.
Yeah.
That's not right way to think about that. I agree with what the conclusion you're getting to, or I agree with these different premises, but the way you've structured this is just wrong. So stop it.
Yeah.
It's not helping anybody.
Mhm.
I say that in all love, because I
Right.
mean, I get told all the time, like, dude, the way you formatted this argument is wrong. So like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Which I find extremely helpful, because then I'm like, oh, okay, now this is the right way to think about it, or I was thinking about it wrong and I need to change how I think about it.
Yeah.
I think that's beneficial. So
Yeah.
I don't say this as like I'm trying to be a jerk. I'm just trying to say, like, that's what you do in academics, and
Yeah.
that's how you get to a better understanding of things.
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah.
like a
So
personal attack.
no, dude, I had to learn that a little bit. I still have a hard time with that here and there. But yeah, Brandon Rickbaugh, my
Yeah.
friend and professor, he just, this doesn't follow. Nope, that's wrong. And it's just
Yeah.
like on my papers, and it's like, crap, dude. But it's super helpful when you go think through it. The one who does this in a way that could never hurt you is Paul Gould. That dude, like, he's not wishy-washy, he's not squishy. It's just whatever he does, it's like, oh, I don't feel bad when Paul gets at me. When Brandon,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, oh, dude, he's not harsh or anything. Brandon's just so good and so logical. Like,
Oh yeah.
it's just funny the difference there. But yeah, definitely, man. I've had my philosophy friends have helped me think through this so much, and I think, yeah, a lot of theologians need more philosopher friends, dude.
So the reason relations is important to this is because we try to like do some model building on his behalf. So okay, let's take it that claim is true. Why would it be true based on your understanding of things?
Hmm.
So I did a lot of work of trying to put together an argument saying, okay, he said this in this place, and this in this place, and this in this place. I think this is what he's thinking.
Mhm.
So I'll give it to you in a structured sort of argument where I think his main assumption to begin is, if God is simple, ase, and creates ex nihilo, then he is maximally transcendent, because it's really important to have a transcendent God, because Isaiah gives us a transcendent God. Yeah, cool.
Mhm.
So that's great. Number two, God is simple ase and creates ex nihilo. Okay, so some people are going to want to deny the simplicity piece. That's another conversation.
Yeah.
Number three in his argument, therefore God is maximally transcendent. So to this point, it's been, I want a maximally transcendent God, and for him, maximal transcendence requires simplicity, aseity, and creation ex nihilo. Now, if God is maximally transcendent in this way, then God cannot stand in real relations to creation.
Mhm.
So that's where the relations comes in, is because he's taking this view of transcendence, saying, then therefore God can't stand in these relations. And five, therefore God cannot stand in real relations to creation, from those first 1, 2, 3. And then sixth, if relational theism is true, then God must stand in real relations to creation, because relational theism is going to want to say, no, there are real relations. And this is the way Dubey talked about them, not necessarily 100% how I talk to them, though realism and radical realism would fit this bucket of real relations.
Okay.
And therefore, he's going to say, therefore, relational theism is false. And from this argument, I think is how he's getting creation ex nihilo in here. So I think he's saying, first, creation ex nihilo is a necessary condition for divine transcendence. Since relational theism denies this version of divine transcendence because it affirms real relations in God, therefore relational theism denies creation ex nihilo.
Yeah.
So that argument, I think, is what he's getting at, is saying, look, transcendence, you got to have it. We all agree.
Yeah.
And creation ex nihilo is necessary for that transcendence. But he's obviously, I mean, I think the argument's unsound and invalid, because I think premise 2 is false and the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises either.
Yeah.
So the argument itself, even if I think, try to be charitable and do some work on his behalf, just doesn't work. So number one, on his face, it's wrong. And number two, even if we try to build it out, blow it out, it still doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I feel that. I wonder, just as you were listing that, I thought about, if transcendence is an incommunicable attribute, if it's an essential attribute of God, it seems like it can't be, because it seems like you need a creation to be transcendent from.
Yeah, so I mean, transcendence is super interesting, and it's funny that it's super important now because prior to the Enlightenment, you don't find that term being used,
Hmm.
um, which I think is just incredibly ironic, given that most people who want to go all in on this version of transcendence or bust, or you deny God's transcendence, hate modern stuff
Right.
completely. So
Right.
I think it's
Totally.
just a little, it's funny.
Yeah.
Not necessarily destructive of anyone's argument. It's just,
Just
I
ironic.
like to
Yeah.
find, yeah, I like to
Yeah.
find funny things.
Sure.
But yeah, I think transcendence would have to be an incommunicable attribute if we want to use the incommunicable communicable sort of distinction,
Mhm.
because if transcendence is supposed to mean certain things like aseity, no one has aseity except for God.
Yeah.
Therefore, no one can be transcendent.
Well, doesn't man, I guess I just haven't thought. So in a classical theistic framework, all the attributes are one, and the distinction between them are just logical, and that makes sense. Uh, some people in hearing me say that makes sense are freaking out. But yeah, whatever. Like that, you can get in that headspace if you're not a classical theist. But transcendence to me, it's just like he's beyond creation. He stands outside of creation in some sense.
Yeah, so you could probably define it that way, and I think you'll find that people define it that way. Is it's literally transcending creation. That's just you're not part of it, and
Yeah.
that's the extent of what transcendence is. Now, others, I think, a significant amount, especially classical theists, are going to say, well, that's like some minimal,
Yeah.
dinky version of transcendence. That's not what we get in the scriptures of God being like so radically other. And they
Yeah.
try to capture this radical otherness in things like simplicity because no one else is simple.
Yeah. That's right.
You things like aseity. No one else has aseity, creation ex nihilo, because no one else can create in that fashion. So these are
Yeah.
the things that really make God transcendent.
But I get that. I think that the minimalist version is just apophatic theology, just saying God is not like creation, and so it's
Sure.
incommunicable because no matter what powers God could even give me, I would still be creation. I could never get outside myself. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, but then a lot of the cats who are like, dude, we love apophatic theology, start doing cataphatic. They start saying positive things about these doctrines, which I thought were originally meant to be God is not like creation, but they're saying, okay, here's what he is like. Even though he's
Yeah.
radically transcendent and we can't know that, we do know that.
Yeah, I mean that's the fun game to play.
It
I'm a
is a
negative
fun game.
theologian, and then I'm gonna sneak in all my positive stuff in the back
Yeah.
door. But when you call me on it, no, just saying negative stuff.
Right. Yeah, that is fun. That's good.
It's the way to get out of get out of any problems.
Well, oh, dude. So, I mean, you're a classical guy. What do you make of transcendence? Is it like a direction? I don't want to say direction. Is it like uh, what's the doctrine that Inman recaptured? Immensity. Is it like immensity in that like immensity is essential to God and he will necessarily fill whatever creation there is, even if there is no creation. And so transcendence is like that. God transcends any creation that it's like a dispositional attribute or something. What do you make of that?
So yeah, I don't know if I would want to cash it out that way. So
Okay.
I really do like to think of it as just it's a way of bundling up particular attributes of God that are incommunicable in some way. So it's the ones that nothing could ever have, and that's what makes God completely different and completely separate
But
from
is it a real attribute
creation.
then, or is it like a
No, I don't think there's an attribute separate attribute that's transcendence. It's just it's a descriptive head for
interesting?
particular ones.
That's not bad. Yeah, that's not bad. But then are there any real attributes, right? Because simplicity, like
Well, it depends on how you want to talk about simplicity.
yeah, it's true.
So, I mean, the traditional way to do it is, they're all identical,
Yeah.
but and all the distinctions in God are some sort of logical distinction where it all is just God's essence and that's all it is. I don't know if that's necessarily incompatible or not. And there are other models of simplicity that I think can function in the classical way
Yeah.
and get all the stuff the classical person wants without being the strict identical way to do it. Now, if you do that, you're going to get attacked from both sides.
Definitely,
'Cause
dude.
there's
100%.
the people who don't like divine simplicity, period, are going to say, well, that's just not divine simplicity. So you're
Yeah.
like me. And the other people are going to say, well, that's not divine simplicity because you're not doing the identity thesis.
Yeah.
I think there is space to have a version of simplicity that isn't as strong as the identity claim while still getting all the benefits that the person wants. Now, I think Oliver Crisp, he's got that parsimonious version.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting way to think about it. I think it has some possible problems. So that might be like the furthest possible edge in my mind that you could toy with.
Yeah,
I
and
think it's got some
people attack
issues.
that too. A lot of the neoclassical guys go, I could affirm this though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So I think there's some problems with that. But I think there is space. I
Yeah.
just don't know where that line is.
Yeah. Well, so I want to get back to Carter's thing. Just one last thing. Sorry, folks, for those who are really trying to follow the Carter line of thought, and I keep breaking it up. But with transcendence being a bundle of other properties like simplicity, the incommunicable ones, I wonder about, and maybe you could just bite this bullet, but what about like a mereological simple? What if the electron wave function is a mereological simple? It seems like simplicity is a communicable attribute if that's the case.
Yep.
And so then that wouldn't work with transcendence.
So you would either say there is nothing that is simple
Right.
outside of God
Mhm.
and go that route. I'm attracted to that route.
Okay.
I probably would say that. However, there's huge swaths of guys in the classical tradition who've said souls are simple,
Yeah.
angels are simple, everything is simple, but
That's
God is
true.
simple in just this in a different way, where God is simple, like all of his attributes are identical, all
Yeah.
like he is just one pure act. No one else is pure act like God, and therefore that is the distinction. So even if you're mereologically simple, you're not completely simple in the same way.
Yeah, and you're not pure act, and you still depend
You
on.
still have a distinction between act and potency
Sure.
in any other in the wave function and all of that.
Mhm. And you're still sustained by
Yep.
the one pure actus purus. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, that's helpful, dude. That's helpful. Well, let's get back to Carter's argument. So you said it's probably not sound and it doesn't follow, but I'm really interested in the distinction you guys made, or you made. I don't know who made it, but between metaphysically lightweight and heavyweight real relations and the work that you do with that. Can you lay that out for us?
Yeah. So obviously that's pretty relevant to what we're talking about. So
Totally.
what I tried to do is use some of these tools on relations that I've researched and studied and written on over here that we talked about earlier, and apply them to this sort of scenario, and say that there's two ways to think about relations. You can be like an anti-realist or a moderate realist, and you can be a more heavyweight realist. So a lightweight version of this, and I call these, they're both real relations in my mind. It just depends on how you think about relations. So this lightweight real relation would be, let's say, a relation R of A to B is real for A if and only if one, A is related by R to B, and two, A and B are non-identical extramental things.
Mhm.
That's a real relation. On my view, that is a real relation.
Yeah.
On that view, God can have real relations to creation and still be immutable, simple, eternal, all of these things. You can keep them all and have a real relation. I think that's a real relation. However,
Yeah.
there is a more heavyweight version of real relations that is much more grounded in the tradition. So when you talk about real relations, if you're talking about theology, this is what people usually use. And they're going to add a third condition. So it's the one, A is related by R to B. Two, A and B are non-identical and extramental things. And then three, there is an extramental foundation in A for R. So they're adding this sort of something that's there, that's grounding, that's the foundation in the object for that relation, and that is what causes the issues and the problems for a classical doctrine. So if you think a real relation has to have an extramental foundation in that object for that relation to exist, then you've got problems on classical theism. If you deny that, which I do, I don't see any reason why you need that, then there is no problem.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, okay. It may be hard for people listening, but once again, metaphysically heavyweight real relation definition is there's a relation of A to B. This relation is real if and only if A is related to B by R. I'm saying it backwards, but there's A and B, and then between them is R, the relation. And then two, A and B are non-identical extramental things, so they're not just in our mind or anything; they actually exist. And then three, this is the difference here. There's an extramental foundation in A for R. So this relation is like grounded in A, right? That's the difference.
It could be grounded in B too. It doesn't matter.
Well, so that's what I think might be the problem. If it were grounded in B, then if A is God, then now we got a really serious problem, and we got almost like a bootstrapping problem of how could God, if God is A and the relation's in B, or the foundation for the relation R is in B, then dude, this is a really huge problem. But if it's in A, I don't know. I'm not sure if I understand. Maybe you can motivate that for me. Like if the grounding of the relation R is in A and God is A, then who cares?
Well, I think the problem is that relation doesn't exist at one point, and then it doesn't exist at another.
Okay.
Right. So then that would indicate there's some sort of change going on in God, which classical theism wants to say, no. God doesn't intrinsically change in any way.
Yeah.
It's all extrinsic change. If there is any change, there's no intrinsic stuff that's changing.
So I wrote that down as a question for lightweight real relation as well, because on that definition, there's A and there's B, and they're extramental, and A is related to B. So if A is God and B is creation, if there's a relation coming into being between A and B, then now A, God, is related to something he wasn't formerly related to.
Well, I would just, yeah, but that's if that relation isn't like there's no metaphysical reality to it. It reduces to the objects. It's not adding a new property to God or subtracting a property. It's all extrinsic. There's nothing intrinsic to God that's changing. So I would say, well, so what?
Yeah. So it's a Cambridge change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, who cares?
Yeah,
but it's a change. But who cares?
If it's a lightweight relation, it's still a real relation. You want to say this isn't anti-realism. Is it maybe more nominalistic? Is it nominalism?
I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe it tends that way, but it's specifically about relations.
Yeah.
So objects exist, properties exist, but relations, no, they just reduce to those substances or objects.
Well, so how about the property creator of the universe? Does that get attached to God? I know you don't want to say that, right? But
clearly, if you're a Christian, you have to say prior to the creation of the universe, God was in some sense not the creator.
Right.
Like I mean, that's, if you don't say that, then you're denying creation ex nihilo.
Yeah.
I don't know how you get around that. Maybe there's some sophisticated way. Obviously you could say God is eternally creator. That is one way that people have made sense of this.
Yeah.
And there's really sophisticated ways to say that without choking down massive, bullets.
Yeah.
I am very sympathetic and might want to say that.
Okay.
But it's so counterintuitive and confusing that I'm like, is there a way for me to affirm classical theism without doing that?
Sure.
And I think there probably is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why there's any intrinsic change in God from creation to not creation. And it gets all freaking messed up and it's confusing. But that's because it's freaking God. I mean, I probably
Yeah.
shouldn't say freaking and God in the same sentence, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, dude. So I'm really, I want to think through this more. I think it's a tough one. I think this creation topic is really tough, especially with properties. And
yeah,
I want to say just intuitively that I think the authorial analogy can help us, but I don't know. I want to do that. I'm not going to toss it out there and just get hit by a bunch of counterexamples from the audience. But I
'cause,
think
mean,
that there's a way
here's
to
the
do it.
thing: prior to creation, if you want to say time is part of creation, there's no time, there's no space, there's nothing. So prior to that, and then when it actually happens, I don't know. You could just like say, well, it it's not like he was something prior because there was no was sort of like locution.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, there was no indexical where you could say it was before creation. That just doesn't make sense
Right.
because time didn't exist before creation.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you can't you can get out of it in some ways,
Yeah.
right? To say, look, you've got to affirm the full package of classical attributes, I think, to make it work.
Well,
So
so Craig does that with God, Son's creation, and it's
Yeah.
really good. But then he goes, yeah, but now God's in creation, and all the classical guys tear their hair out. So maybe there's a way to appropriate some of what Craig's saying without going the full Monty and putting God in time.
Now I'm going to get tarred and feathered for saying something that Craig said is useful or good. So
That's right.
if I'm a classical theist, you've got to throw him out, right? The
Yeah,
whole
that's
thing.
right.
I love Craig. I think he's smart. I think he affirms some really wonky stuff.
For sure.
But I mean, he can be helpful and a useful resource. I don't know why not.
Yeah, dude. So I'm coming from like pretty hardcore precept stuff, and so again, Craig is the boogeyman. But you read his stuff, and some of his stuff, it's like, dude, this is really really good. And others of it is like, this is really bad. I would never say this, but if I wanted to write against him, like it's going to take a year for me to write against him at least, because he's so sharp, So I think a lot of people kind of just go, he's crazy. It's like, oh, that's one way to do it. But if you want to write an article about why he's crazy, good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw somebody saying that like he's a heretic for some reason. And I'm like, let's slow the roll, man. Let's think through what we're saying here. Let's think what's going on, and let's be careful with that, man. Craig can be different on some stuff. Oh, they said he was a process theist, and I was like, he's not a process theist. Are you crazy? Just because he says one thing that process theism agrees with doesn't make him a process theist.
I know. I think that's
just nuts.
Well, that's kind of what we're getting into now, right? Where it's anyone who, in Carter's claim, there's two categories. It's either you're a classical theist or you're a relational theist. And if you want to couch that as process theism, because God changes, now everyone is a process theologian who's not a classical theist, and it's classical theism or process theism. And we all know process theism is dirty. And so I don't want to be that. So
sorry, anybody process theist listeners out there.
Oh, they don't listen.
Love you.
Those guys don't exist. There's like two of them, and they say crazy stuff. But yes, for sure, they wouldn't listen to my stuff, I'm sure. Maybe they are. If you are, hey, I'm sorry too, and let's be friends.
Drop a comment. Let's be friends.
That's right. Cool. Yeah, they might be offended by what I said, but I don't think they listen.
Go on.
Okay, so there's tough stuff to bite on every side, and it's wild and it's fun. Yeah. But you're saying that you don't have to I don't even like saying like theistic mutualism and relational theism, because it gets tossed. It's too broad a thing. It includes people like my friend, like Paul Gould, is not the same as an eco-feminist theologian.
Nope.
Like just not. And Van Hoos, like, good luck putting him anywhere. Good luck, because it's really hard to categorize what he says.
Because he's a theologian.
Yeah. Well, he does appropriate a lot of continental stuff, but he's come over. He likes analytic guys now. So all that it really takes is, look, anyone who's not a classical theist, but who affirms a metaphysically lightweight real relation can evade this critique that God can't create ex nihilo.
Oh yeah, I think you can evade it. I mean, I think you could go the other real relation route and the heavyweight and still avoid his argument.
Okay.
I'm just trying to say this is what's motivating Carter's claim. I think Carter's claim is wrong.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that a relational theist can go say, "Hey, I can affirm all the immutability and stuff when I
Yeah.
affirm this sort of real relation." No, you can't.
Mhm.
But you can affirm creation ex nihilo. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good, man. That's a good distinction. That is good. Man. Um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So it's cool. I like that you're finding bad arguments and saying, look, this is a bad argument. And then yeah, you're wanting to say, but you don't get the full package. And there are some real benefits in affirming classical theism. And
Yeah.
so and they would, a lot of the neoclassical guys would go, that's fine anyways, because I don't want a God who's immutable in the strongest sense. I just want him immutable in his moral character and not in other things.
Yeah. So a lot of times, classical theists, for whatever reason, we're on the defense. We're defending off all these objections, saying, "Yeah, this objection is bad. This objection is wrong. Please, please, still keep us as your friend. We're not completely crazy." But I think we can go on the attack too and say relational theism is bogus for this reason. And I think, like, the idea of wanting to just have an immutable character, I don't think you can have that on a relational theism view. I don't think you can have an immutable character without the complete, full, strong divine immutability.
Yeah.
I don't think it works. I think you end up denying that God is immutable in any sense.
What if
So
what
Go
if we just take like Craig's model, or John Feinberg also says God is in time. What if
Yeah.
and Feinberg's going to be much more on the classical side than Craig, I believe.
Yeah, I
Should
think
be.
so.
And you just say, look, God, God took on time, but that doesn't change his potential. Like he didn't gain a potential to sin or something like that just because. What do you make of that?
I think it's weird.
It is weird. Yeah.
I mean, it depends. Like, what the heck is time? So, like, talk to me about what time is, and why is it that God apparently takes it on, or becomes its prisoner, or however you want to take it.
Well, I wouldn't say
Um,
prisoner, but that
well, I mean,
poisons the well.
that's the objection, right? That
Yeah, it is.
if God's in time, then he's the prisoner of time. He's like in the box, whatever.
Well, if you were let's go to the authorial analogy. God, and this is Paul Helm hates this, not because of authorial, but Paul Helm like really does not like John Frame's model and calls that process theism. But so God exists outside the story, but God also wrote the story and wrote himself in as the main character. And so it's like C.S. Lewis writing himself into the Great Divorce. So C.S. Lewis exists outside of the Great Divorce time, but also within the Great Divorce time as a character within that story. And so he can relate to the characters in the story through C.S. Lewis, the character, and not just as the author that stands outside the created time.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that's a very interesting and probably fruitful way to think about it.
Nice.
And I don't see why we couldn't pursue that in relation to classical theism.
Yeah.
And not just the problem of evil.
Yeah.
So why not extrapolate that out there? So write a paper on it for me.
Well, I am, dude. So I'll send you that. That's good.
Awesome.
I think that's helpful because I there are certain things like relating to creatures in time and space that make a lot of sense to me, that a lot of the neoclassical guys are like, bro, if you have a relationship with God, we're evangelicals. Yes, we want that.
Yeah.
But I still want to say, like, yeah, dude, I think the classical guys are right in a lot of stuff. And mostly, like, a big part of the church has said this forever. And I think that's a real big motivation for me as I learn more about church history. I want to be, if I can, I want to be on the side of those dudes. Like, I think that they weren't crazy.
There's two things here. Number one, classical theists aren't saying that you don't relate to God.
Right.
So that objection's silly.
Yeah.
Number two, I've always thought it's useful to stop myself and think, if I'm disagreeing with the majority position for the last 4,000 plus years, maybe I'm missing something and I should stop and just really consider the evidence.
Yeah.
And if I'm wishy-washy on it, I'm going to defer to the authority of all of these people who've thought about it longer than I have.
Yeah.
They didn't have TV back then.
Mhm.
They didn't have cell phones. They had like all their time was spent thinking about this stuff. I mean, I freaking go on Twitter and I watch sports and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I don't spend as much time thinking as they do. So clearly, I should be cautious, utterly cautious, before I just say, "Yep, these guys are dumb. Didn't really think about it very well.
Yeah.
We've got it figured out now."
No, I'm with you on that. I think that I genuinely think that should be the posture of Christians. And this is something I talked about with Ryan Mullins actually about God and time, where I was like, Ryan, man, was it hard for you to let go of the timeless God? And he was like, it was super hard, super hard. I think the arguments led me there. And I just, even though it's scary to go that route or whatever, I just really appreciated that he said that instead of like, no, slough off the old timey, like I think if you're going to disagree with tradition, then you need to, it should be a sad thing. It should be like, dude,
Sure.
it was hard for me to do this, but I'm going where the truth leads, because to quote, Aristotle, like, hey, Plato's our friend, but the truth is our friend closer still, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, truth obviously trumps whatever, however unbroken of a line of tradition has said something. It's just,
Yeah.
I think it's a serious reason to question
For sure.
my intelligence on said subject. Clearly, I must have missed something somewhere.
Yeah.
And maybe it's possible that you didn't, and it's just, for whatever reason, politics or butt kissing or whatever, it just never been changed.
Yeah.
But I think there's a good chance that you probably missed something.
Yeah. And so I'm in the free church, but I'm kind of a Baptist, but but I'm like, dude, I disagree with the tradition on baptism. Like that's a really like, and you're Reformed Baptist. Well, I talked with Gavin about that. I brought this up to Gavin, and Gavin goes, well, they all had different views of baptism.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, there hasn't been a universal view on baptism. Yes, at some point in the 3rd, 4th century, infants become like,
they all dipped their babies though. Like they thought it did different things, but they all dipped them or sprinkled them. I guess maybe they didn't. Maybe you're right. Yeah, the Eastern Church.
But the thing is, not everybody was baptized in, infant baptism. Yeah, at some point when the state church becomes coupled up to, I guess the church becomes coupled to the state, you get more infant baptisms. But I mean, every adult conversion is not an infant baptism.
That's true.
So it's not like everybody's baptized as an infant. I mean, it's way more messy than it. You talk to your Presbyterian friend and they like to make it black and white. Clearly, we're the bearers of a tradition. Like, okay, go put your Genevan robe on, dude.
Yeah, some of them do, man. Some of them do.
Oh, I know. I love the robe. I just poke fun at them.
Right. Okay. So just to close up here, man. You said obviously we have a relation to God as Christians. Does God have a relation to us?
Well, it depends on how you want to define relation again. So on my account, I'd say, yeah, absolutely. On most classical renditions, they would say not a real relation, logical relation. So he does have a relation to you.
Yeah.
But it's not in this real sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say it doesn't exist, that he doesn't like actually love you. He does. It's the metaphysics that's going on behind the scenes that they want to say it's not real metaphysically. So that's what gets confusing, and almost the real terminology almost becomes really unhelpful because it makes people think that God doesn't love them, or care for them or those sort of things. That's not what it's trying to say.
But and you got to understand the real here is in philosophical context, like realism or Platonism, like the universals really exist. So it's So does God have a lightweight metaphysical relation to us?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Well, so God exists outside of time. Do you think this commits you to B theory of time, the block universe?
Probably, but I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, depending on the day, I don't have a problem with that either. But.
Some people, I think you can probably still do the A theory. I just don't understand how. But I'm not smart enough in the
somebody can figure it out.
Time to figure it out.
Well,
so whoever that is.
Well,
for
so yeah, do it. Come on the podcast, talk about it. So God relates to us, not in the heavyweight real relation, but it seems like so God's outside of time, but yet there's a point in time where I became a Christian and had this relation with God. How do we make sense of that with like a timeless God?
Well, it's all the unfolding, like, eternal act of God. So I mean,
Mm.
I don't know of a
Is it a
good
tense? Is it a
example.
tense relationship, or is it
Well, no, it's tenseless,
okay?
I would think.
But didn't I go through like a real change from going from like non-Christian to Christian?
Yeah, sure, you did.
Yeah, but then wouldn't the relation go from me back to God, like relating to Him as a fallen creature, object of wrath, to then a point or a series of time. I don't know how you want to cash that
Mhm.
out, but at
Yeah, for
T
you.
for me. But I was an object of His wrath, and there was wrath directed at me from
Yeah.
Him, and then it switched to love.
I mean, it did for you.
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't know. I don't see why that has to be metaphysically imported back into God, where he's got to have to to really change. I mean, it's
Yeah. So okay, so one way that I've heard it cashed out is from Will Bankston. He's a friend of mine. He's a PhD student under Van Hoos. He's awesome. I can't wait till he finishes his PhD. It's going to be awesome. But he wrote a essay about this, or an article about this, and it's pulling on Aquinas and the fire analogy. And so like
yeah,
the fire's hot. It can be used to roast marshmallows, but it can also be used to burn my skin. So like when I'm a sinner, it's burning my
oh
skin or
yeah, that's
whatever.
good.
But when I step back and now it's warming me and I feel its splendor or something, right? So like the
Yeah,
fire
I think
didn't
that's a good
change.
example.
Okay, okay, that's not bad. That's cool. This is cool, man. This is fun. I'm
Yeah,
learning stuff. It's just pulling me apart in my brain, but it's fun, and I think we got to. It's worth thinking about if we're gonna be thinking about God.
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, dude, I have to go think more about all this stuff. But where can people find more of your work? Can you give us all your stuff?
Yeah, so I think the easiest place to go is our website, thelondonlyceum.com. If you want to read more about me, get my CV, whatever, it's all there. About it, you click the like about the founders little drop down box. You can find us on all your iTunes, Spotify, Podcast Addict, whatever you listen to. You can find our podcast on there, Fresh Pod, every Wednesday. And we talk to all sorts of different people about all sorts of different topics. We try to be charitable and how we talk to people, but also critical. So I'll try to push as much as I can without being a jerk.
Yeah.
So we try to have like a friendly atmosphere, but also a serious atmosphere at the same time. So go londonlyceum.com. You can find my contact info there, all that kind of stuff. Email me, hit me up, do whatever. Love to connect with people. I think it's fun. Anybody who leaves a comment, like you can put comments in people's websites that
Yeah.
just like, contact us, do that. If you do that, I will reply to you. I reply to every single person, whether it's positive, negative feedback, don't care. I will reply and say, hey, thanks for the note. So if you contact me, I will get back in contact with you.
Awesome. Yeah, and as Jordan said earlier, he's in the Facebook group Parker's Pensées Penseurs, so you can ask him some questions there. Be nice, everything like that. You can push on him, but be nice. And man, he wouldn't say this, and he doesn't. But if you can support his podcast, like if you support this one, support his too. Buy merch on Spotify. I'm sure there's a way, or Anchor or whatever, to support. Do that. Financially support. Like if we want to change things, you got to support your favorite podcasts, and his is awesome. So please go and do that. Leave him a good 5-star review, all that good stuff, just like mine. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.